these could be really smart, wonderful people, but all they do is skim. And because they skim so effectively, we hold them up as if they have some genius that we need to listen to them because they're clearly so successful. That's the programming we've been under. It's this fraudulent idea that you can have something for nothing and we can grow forever without facing any consequences.
Chris, how did you come? What's your evolution by which you came to having the particular vision of society, our societal dilemma, shall we say?
I'd love to tell you that there was like this great moment where the clouds parted and this bolt of lightning came down and I was bestowed with this great wisdom. The kindest I can be is I'll call it enlightened self-interest. And what happened was 2000 and 2001, the whole stock market meltdown started to happen. Because at this point, I'd done everything culture had asked of me, and I was very, in a society terms, a very successful person. Right, got my PhD and have my MBA, and I'm working in corporate America, and I'm doing all this stuff, and my stock holdings are getting eviscerated. Right, just getting killed. And I was a genius in the 90s.
Hey, you're still a genius. Come on, that doesn't fade.
So I'm a curious guy and I'm a scientist by training. So, I like data and I like hypotheses, and I'm not afraid to accept and reject things based on what the data is telling me. And so there's a lot of narratives that need to be unpacked in this whole idea of investing and how we're going to grow forever. And even the idea that we could look at the last 100 years of stock gains and say that's somehow predictive of the next 100 years. At any rate, I started digging, I got curious. And what I found in that first E, the economy, that alone freaked me out enough that I said, wow, this is completely unsustainable. Somehow, Scott, I'd made it through an entire education, a PhD and an MBA, and nobody bothered to teach me how money is created in the banking system. So I find out how money's made in the banking system. Like, this is odd. This looks interesting. And I learned about entitlement programs and how they, the accrual-based deficits of the United States were literally 2 to 4 times higher than the reported cash deficits. All this stuff economically, I said, wow, this doesn't look good.
Now, Chris, I got to set the stage here in a certain way. The people who are watching this more likely than not don't know what accrual basis is. So try to get very granular in
Sure.
the terms you use.
Sure. So my cash-based deficit as a father of 3 children of college age, my cash-based deficit, before they hit college age was one thing, but the accrual-based deficit is your accrual takes account of your liabilities and your assets. So even though my kids haven't started college, I could reasonably look forward and say, someday they will, and that'll be an expense. And if I don't accrue for that appropriately when it hits me, it's really going to hurt. Because my cash-based deficit looks really positive right up till the first kid goes to college, right? And then all of a sudden,
surprise,
right? So on a cash basis, the United States Social Security Fund and Medicare are nominally still solvent, but on an accrual basis, they're completely hopelessly insolvent. So once you're at insolvency, now all you have to answer is bankruptcy is a legal process. When people say bankruptcy, that's not the correct term. Bankruptcy is a legal thing that you go through. Insolvency simply says I have more liabilities than I have assets. And
that was Lehman Brothers before the Fed pulled the plug. The day
Correct.
Before, they were insolvent, but not in bankruptcy.
Right.
Pull the plug and they go into bankruptcy automatically. The insolvency is it's like realizing your paper losses in the stock market, sort of.
Yeah. So I'm looking at all this stuff, and I took a lot of accounting in my MBA program, so I'm kind of familiar with that. So that started to concern me, but because I'm a scientist, I kept digging, and once I discovered how money was created, light bulbs started to go off, because once you understand how money is created in our system, it's all loaned into existence, right? So what do we know about a loan? Everybody listening to this has had a loan. It has a principal component and some interest you have to pay, right? So here's a fun fact. Anything that's growing by some rate of percentage, a percentage rate over time, is growing exponentially, right? And so this is a really key insight. Everybody who's scientifically organized has gone through the necessary training to understand exponential or hyperbolic or parabolic growth.
Okay, so exponential. So everything about human enterprise on Earth seems to be taking this exponential curve.
Right. So, and here's the thing. Everything that we know about in our world is presented to us in exponentials, but we don't know it, right? Hey, Teslas are growing their car sales by 50% a year. Hey, we're seeing 3% more GDP this quarter than last year at the same quarter. We want to see 12% more homes sold in the Bay Area, whatever these things are.
Or 2% inflation.
2% inflation. Sounds harmless, right?
Yeah, it sounds harmless, but that means it doubles every 37 point something years.
Sure. And so let's take a simple example because the math is easy. So China's growing at roughly 7% a year, and that's their target. Hey, we just want to grow 7% a year. If you said, hey, Chris, they got jeans 7% off, I'm not going to run out and buy them. It sounds like an unexciting figure. But when something's growing 7%, it's very exciting because it means, roughly speaking, using the rule of 72, we can answer this question. How long will it be before something growing 7% a year is twice as large? 10 years, right? Divide 7 into 72, call it 10, right? So it means that China's economy is going to be twice as big in 10 years. And then after another period of doubling, so 10 more years after that, it'll now be 4 times as large as the starting point because it's 2 times 2, right? It's double. So you look at that and you say, well, hold on. Every economy in the world, the United States, China's, France, all of Europe, Russia, everybody in the world is trying to achieve exponential economic growth, which means we're all looking at some doubling rate. Whatever the numbers are, the whole world is on track to have the economy be twice as big as now, maybe 25 years from now. And every plan in the world is based on that. The solvency of every pension program, every entitlement program, every hope and dream of everybody listening to this that's related to money that's in the markets is keyed to this idea that we're going to keep doubling the economic output. Hey, Hosanna, forever and ever, amen, right? Well, scientists have been quietly over on the side since the 70s saying, hey, that's probably not possible. Malthus noted it, that if you have arithmetic growth compared against geometric growth, those two things get into trouble sooner or later, right? And a lot of people...
I want to emphasize the sooner or later because Malthus was discredited because his time prediction didn't work out. And
right.
Human ingenuity is powerful, and with Borlaug's Green Revolution, we've increased the number of people we can feed on a failing planet. But we do so by borrowing heavily on our natural capital, like the fertility of the soils, like the forest base of the Amazon.
There's a lot of logical errors that are constantly thrown against people like myself and probably yourself, people who hold their hands up and say, hey, we have a logic problem here. And people will throw out the most illogical stuff. They'll say, somebody was wrong about something that sounded like that 200 years ago. So you're probably wrong today.
And we have an idiot in chief in the White House who is contradicting these things every day. And, he is the master of, if I say it enough times, people will believe it's true.
Well, to be fair, a lot of things that are absolutely untrue are held as common knowledge by people today.
Yeah.
Across a wide range of subjects.
Not just a Trump phenomenon. Mm-hmm.
No, it's more than that. It's that we've all grown up, everybody listening to this, guaranteed, has grown up under a regime of almost pure propaganda that says growth is always good. We want more growth. We're going to have more growth. We need more growth. The truth is, I don't need growth. You don't need growth. Nobody listening to this needs growth. Right?
I grew to 6 feet and I stopped.
That's great. If there wasn't inflation, I could be perfectly happy not having my income grow constantly, right? I don't need a larger house as I get older, right? I don't need growth. Nobody does. What does need growth is the banking system.
And that is the chips that the bank rips off every year. Is that 2% interest rate or aggregate? It's probably running more than 2%. Whatever the inflation rate is, that's what the banks reclaim from the economy every year.
It's a giant skimming operation. My grandfather, I come from a long line of bankers, a small regional bank in upstate New York. And my grandfather's time, when he first took over as head of a small bank in upstate New York, the banking industry, total financial industry, was about 4% of the economy. That's about right. You moving capital, holding capital, it's a legitimate position to have. Now it's about 40%, and it's a giant skimming operation. You look at who went to Davos for the World Economic Forum. They had 1,500 jets colliding as they all arrived to tut-tut over climate change or whatever they were talking about. But if you looked at who those 1,500 people were, very few of them were in the business of producing anything. They were all skimmers and grifters. right? You have finance professionals. Oh my God, the world's most famous private equity, manager says X, and we should all listen and be concerned. These could be really smart, wonderful people, but all they do is skim. And because they skim so effectively, we hold them up as if they have some genius that we need to listen to them because they're clearly so successful. That's the programming we've been under. It's this fraudulent idea that you can have something for nothing and we can grow forever without facing any consequences. And look, the people who play the game the best, aren't they amazing, right?
Oh, yeah. We make them the rock stars. We make them, not literally, but they are the glitterati, they were called at one of the programs I did in COP24. But
and I mean, just as a quick aside, it was heartwarming seeing how many people actually were affected by the death of Stephen Hawking. Here's a scientist, right? A very famous astrophysicist, and that was touching. But I don't see anybody, any ecologists who are on that same plane, who are being revered, who are being followed, who are being listened to, because their message isn't, we could reach for the stars, aren't we clever? Their message is, oh my God, we're killing the planet.
Yeah.
Right? And they
not
might
your
be
favorite narrative.
No, it's not the popular narrative. So when I see like there is still some room for science in our culture, it's not broad-based. It's not, we value intellectual, rigorous analysis and debate.
It's the David Attenborough kind, which feels good. It's the deGrasse Tyson kind, which again is the reach for the stars. Don't confuse me with the gritty facts of the planet.
Oh yeah, well we'll mine asteroids.
We'll go to Mars.
We'll go to Mars, and again, I say this a lot, but it's my waggish response. Like, listen, if you think you want to go to Mars, they got this valley in Antarctica, which is about as cold and as dry. Go check a couple weeks, spend 2 weeks there, come back and share your passion for Mars with me. I'll be all ears.
Or take a look at that movie, The Martian, that Matt Damon did. That was sci-fi, that he could even get by because he had all that stuff that his NASA teammates left behind, for him, like freeze-dried packets of their own poop that he could use as fertilizer. It was quite a clever movie. I don't know if you saw it.
I did. It was. And I mean, the takeaway shouldn't have been, aren't we clever? Let's race for Mars. It should have been, wow, that's going to be a really interesting experiment to run, but that's not a place we could really settle.
Exactly.
Right?
And that should have been the takeaway, as you say. Yeah.
But more importantly, it should be, we're already on a spaceship that's amazing and regenerative and very forgiving and holds a temperature band in just this, like, most Goldilocks of possible ranges. Perfect. But if we can't run this one, we got no hope of Mars, like just none, right? Yeah. And it's really ridiculously hard, but people are holding this really ridiculous notion that technology is somehow going to suddenly create a whole bunch of solutions. And our experience, if we're wise about it, says every technological solution has usually been in response to a problem created by a prior solution. And we're on this sort of daisy chain of increasing solutions.
Unanticipated side effects.
Right, which is where, we need to have that humility to come back in, which is to say, we don't yet have the capability to understand complex systems. Not even simple complex systems, let alone multifactorate complex systems, right? Simple ones, we can't model them. They have a couple of qualities. One, they owe their order and complexity to the continued throughput of energy. And two, you can't predict what's going to happen, Mm-hmm. Despite our best efforts. How long have we been trying to model earthquakes, right? Faults are complex structures. It would be well within our interests to say we should really be able to predict these things. Can't do it, right? The idea that we could understand the amazing interplay of all of nature and how billions of years of evolution has come together to create a really finely tuned machine. That's what we're missing right now, is that humility to say, we're really doing some horrible things here, and we don't even know what they are. I've done a couple of interviews with this very sort of philosopher, spiritual kind of guy named Stephen Jenkinson, and one of them was around a book he wrote called Money and the Soul's Desire, and it took a very historical view, starting with the Code of Hammurabi and our whole ascent from hunter-gatherers into tribal, into city-based organisms, and he looked at the role of money in there, and he really got me because he said, it's always misquoted that money is the root of all evil. He said, it's not the whole quote. The whole quote is, for the love of money is the root of all evil. For the love of describes your relationship to it. Money itself is neutral. But as soon as it's your relationship to money that then becomes the driving factor. So you have to examine our relationship with money and how it's used.
I will debate that, because that was a truth when it was spoken, perhaps. But now money has become an institution with power and with program. That is, money has programmed itself into the operating system of the planet in a certain way. Money allows things to happen or doesn't. And so money controls, for the most powerful segment of humanity, those 1,500 jets that arrived at Davos to applaud them. Money has become the root of evil, because it's taken on human intellect and it's glommed onto it. We now societally love it.